Hello, I'm Rachel from Douentza Garden here in Ireland, and I nearly broke my neck there slipping on the mud, which is just indicative of how the weather has been this spring. So you are very welcome to the March garden tour, although a bit belated, and I just want to start off by telling you that yes, it has been so very wet this spring. It was also really wet last autumn, and then the winter was particularly cold, so that's taken its toll on what can be done here in the garden, and also on a few losses that all of us have had. Okay, so if you want to have a look around my garden in March, although it's actually the beginning of April now, forgive me, then stay tuned. You are very welcome to this March garden tour, and as you can see, even just behind me, there is so much breaking forth in the garden, from that beautiful fragrant pink viburnum to the tulips, the Darwin hybrid tulips down below, and those are going to be very prominent themes on this garden tour. Now, if you're new here, very welcome. I just want to start off by letting you know that I garden in Southern Ireland in what roughly equates as hardiness zone 9. Now in Ireland we don't use those hardiness zones at all, so take it as a rough guide of hardiness. So first up, if you're not new to the channel, you're going to notice that the arches behind me here are a different colour. And yes, in the February garden tour, we had gotten as far as putting the undercoat on these arches, a lovely cream undercoat, but this is the final colour, and I'm really pleased with it. I think it just gives the garden a bit of freshness, and while the colour isn't exactly green, it does do a good job of blending into the surrounding foliage. The second thing that is new in the garden is the acquisition of a lot of mulch. Now, a nearby strawberry or fruit farm here was giving away its grow bags, the grow bags where the strawberry plants were grown. I guess they renew them every year, and they were just giving this away free. So I went along and helped myself to lots and lots of packets of these strawberry planters. Now, some of the strawberry plants are actually still alive, so I was able to reuse them, but the compost or the soil mix that the strawberries were in, well, that was just perfect for putting on the garden, because we all compost. Well, anybody with a garden as big as mine, it's an acre in size, that's half a hectare. You really do need to compost the stuff that comes off your garden, but there's never enough, and spring is the perfect time for just laying a thick layer of mulch on the beds to stop new weeds coming up and just to give plants that little bit of an extra boost in terms of feed. And this strawberry mulch has done such a wonderful job of doing just that. If only I had a trailer that I could have brought more of it home. And of course, the tidying up of the borders is progressing. So this involves cutting back the perennials, weeding, edging, and just basically making the borders look a whole lot smarter. And when you do that, then you can see all the pretty little flowers that are poking up that you might notice if they were covered in a layer of leaves or debris. Now, I really am getting a move on with this job, because you may recall that last month I spent most of it in hospital, and yeah, I have a lot of catch up to do. And one thing I am doing this year is to edge as I go. Now, edging is done with a half moon edger, and it just involves recutting the side of the border so that I have a straight edge, whether it's a straight line or a curve, at least it looks even. Last year I experimented with leaving that till later, so I'd go around and I'd cut back the perennials and I'd weed the borders, and then the plan was always to come back just in like a complete day, just edge everything. But you know what? that doesn't happen because there's always something else to do, and I find it much more productive to do everything with a particular border in the one go and not have to revisit it later, because you're going to have to revisit it later anyway. New weeds will pop up, etc., and you know, things need to be deadheaded. And in terms of the garden, there is just so much to see at the moment, from tulips, and I guess the earliest tulips I have, which tend to be the Fosteriana group, well, they're in full flower at the moment with beautiful orange and white heads. And the magnolias are looking fantastic, just beginning to go over at this stage. And of course, the primroses. Now, I have a complete and utter love for primroses, and I just think they are such a wonderful plant to have early on in the year. They are so many different colours, different shapes, and they can just really bring a garden to life. Now, this particular bed has two primroses that I think do a good job of contrasting against each other. The dark one is called Dark Rosaline, and its purple foliage looks fantastic against the double cream blooms of this other primrose. Now, last year I divided these and spread them around, which is why the clumps are quite small, but they've all taken well and I'm very pleased with how it looks. And over here I've planted out some Barnhaven primroses that I grew from seed just 1.5 years ago. Now, you may recall that video when I sowed the seed in autumn, and look at all the beauties I have, so many different colours. Now, Barnhaven is a company based in France, and one of the sets of seeds that they sell is a packet of random seeds scooped from the leftovers on the table. So they're without name, they're not any particular variety. Well, they are particular varieties, but you can't know what until you sow them and see what colours you get. And I think this patch here just looks so cheery. Just a little update now on a couple of the primroses that I bought from Barnhaven just 2 years ago, and you can see how well they're doing. Being in hospital for most of March, I completely missed the daffodils, and specifically these daffodils that I planted at the back of the border last, I suppose, the beginning of summer. Now, these are daffodils I grew in pots, and then I planted them here at the back of the border in what really is wasted space. So this spot here is quite shady, and as the summer progresses and the foliage in front gets big, you can no longer see this spot. But it's a great place to put daffodils that you can see in spring, and I'm sure these looked fabulous just a little while ago. And speaking of fabulous, my cardiocrinums, which I moved a little while ago, I think they're going to produce 2 flower spikes this year. I certainly hope so, if the lily beetle doesn't decimate them first. And another job for this spring that I am doing for the first time is to prune my cotinus, or to pollard my cotinuses. Now, I've always had a kind of love-hate relationship with cotinus, and my problem with this bush is that it just really wants to be a tree. And with the maturity that the specimens in my garden have, they have just grown so tall, and there's no way you can sensibly prune this tree so that it is a manageable size. Anyway, I discovered or learnt about a procedure that they carry out in 2 very famous gardens in England to control the size of cotinus. And those 2 gardens are the Beth Chatto garden and also Great Dixter garden. And what they do there is every spring they pollard their cotinus. Now, pollarding is a process whereby you cut the stem of the tree or the main trunk of the tree to the required height. So maybe 1 foot, 2 foot in my case. And what happens when you cut it off like that is this vigorous bush then produces lots and lots of water shoots, and it produces big leaves. So the result is, I guess, a more juvenile looking foliage and bigger leaves and a much more manageable size for the garden. Now I am doing this for the first time, so this is my yellow cotinus tree before it was cut, and then now over there is the same tree after it has been cut. Now normally you would carry out this pruning in early March, but I was in hospital, it wasn't possible, so it got done at the end of March. But you know, the cotinus is such a vigorous tree. If you cut it at any time of year, it sends out these little water shoots all over the place. So I'm quite confident that this will do well going forward. And I guess you'll just check back and see how this does during the summer, and then the procedure next spring when I need to cut them for the second time. So moving over here, I just want to briefly show you some work I've been doing in this particular border here, and it's looking fabulous with the Purissima Fosteriana tulip, the white one there, coming into bloom. As I look at it now though, I'm thinking, goodness, I need a few more tulips in there, which I'm going to purchase in autumn and put down. But I've done a lot of work in here just opening up this border, and you can see that there's a very large buddleia over there. There's my Melanoselinum forest, as I like to call it, and Oigelia. I have no idea how to pronounce the name of that bush, so I'm writing it up on the screen. I'm sure there are plenty of you out there who are going to correct me. But this is a bush that had gone far too big, and it was really shading out the whole border. So I cut it quite hard back. It's the wrong time of year to do that, but I did it anyway because I just want to let a lot more light in here to facilitate the plants in there that need more light in order to flower well. And it's been a fantastic spring for the camellias as well. This red one behind isn't looking amazing, but oh my goodness, some of the Williamsii ones were looking fantastic. The one that the cultivar known as Debbie was amazing before I went into hospital, just gone over now. But the real star is my camellia hedge, which is just, I suppose, setting out to make itself absolutely fantastic this spring. Another plant looking super at the moment is that euphorbia over there, and I always think that euphorbias are such a versatile plant. There are so many out there. There are ones that are basically succulents and need to be grown in pots in my climate, and there are ones that do so well in the garden and are even a bit thuggish and weedy. But this particular variety here is fantastic. It just needs a good bit of space, full sun and well-drained soil. And if you give it the space, and that's the problem I often have, I often squeeze them out by putting other plants too close beside them. But if you give them the space, then you get a fantastic display like this. But it's not all good news, and I have had some losses too. From this Olearia tree, which I've had in the ground for 13 years, never a bother on it, but the cold winter and perhaps the wet in autumn and spring has seen it off. And if we scratch the wood, you can see that it is quite completely dead right through. But I have even sadder news for you, and it relates to my box hedging. So here we can see this box circle that goes around the cherry blossom tree, and over there we have my cloud pruned area. And I guess the real problem was the wetness. So as I mentioned before, we had a really wet autumn, followed by a cold winter, and then a really wet spring. And there is something that loves this kind of dampness, and it is fungal disease. Now, my box hedging has a bad case of box blight. I have had it before. I've treated it before successfully, but now it's back again. And I guess I could see that it was coming here at some stage in the winter. I could see that the box blight was coming back, but there wasn't much I could do about it, because you don't want to cut back your hedge when the conditions are still damp. You're just going to spread the disease. So I had to wait and see, and I waited and I saw, and what I saw was that it spread over to the cloud pruned area over there, which is less bad, but it is definitely there as well. So I'm going to have to do a big treatment of the box hedging, which I will share with you in a video, just whenever the weather just gets a bit dry, because you do need dryness. And I'm going to have to cut it back and treat it, and fingers crossed that it will do the trick. And speaking of bad news, there is just one other little piece of bad news, which is up here in the greenhouse, and it relates to my aeoniums. Come and see. So the bad winter has taken its toll on my aeonium collection, and I have or had quite a number of aeoniums which I used to plant out in the garden in the summer and then lift and store in a frost-free greenhouse. Unfortunately, I've been storing them in the new greenhouse, which is unheated, and I guess the temperatures just dipped a bit too low for these plants to survive, despite being kept bone dry all through the winter. But on the positive side, just look at my tiger lilies bursting through the surface of the soil in these little pots, and it's just so wonderful to see that new spring growth coming up. It has been a difficult spring for seed sowing for me, because I spent most of March in the hospital, and that's the prime time when seeds need to be sowed. But I did get a few in before I went into hospital, notably the Meconopsis, which you've seen updates on in previous videos. There were some little muscari and tulips, species tulips, that I grew from seed for reasons I won't go into now at the moment. I also grew Lobelia syphilitica from seed, which is springing up now at the moment. Yes, named after the disease. Apparently it was a cure or ease the symptoms of syphilis in the past. And some lilies, some more lilies, which are now germinating. And then I was in hospital, and when I came back from hospital, I was acutely aware of all the seeds I hadn't sown. So the first thing I did was sow 3 trays of annuals and some Echium wilpretii. So I will at least have those to dot around my garden in any spaces that are visible during the summer. And I think I'm going to leave it for this year then for seeds, maybe a few sunflowers, because sunflowers are grand in April. I have so much other things to do in the garden in terms of clearing and weeding that I really don't have a lot of time to spare to kind of sowing and tending to small seedlings. While I was in hospital, my dahlias and calla lilies did get potted up, and they were done by somebody I never met. A very long story, but anyway, she was kind enough to do it, and it was supervised by my husband, who looked at one of my videos, can you believe, on how to pot up dahlias. There was a bit of confusion because, of course, when I left the dahlias in the greenhouse in autumn, I was fully expecting that it would be me that would be potting them up. So, you know, when you do things yourself, you don't label them fully. So, for example, Dahlia Pooh, as in Winnie the Pooh, I didn't write Dahlia on it, I just wrote Pooh. And Dahlia Christine, I just wrote Christine. And then for all the calla lilies, it wasn't Xanthodecia Picasso. I just wrote Picasso. And then, of course, when you're in hospital, you don't quite remember exactly where you left your dahlias or your callas last autumn. So there was a bit of nosing around and a bit of mispotting and all that, but I think we got there in the end, and I'm just glad to have them potted, so at least they can get growing and I can get them into the ground a bit later on. And I guess that's all I really want to tell you about. Oh, in terms of the garden tour, I forgot something. I forgot something very important that kind of bridges the gap between greenhouse and garden. And it relates to some tulips and wallflowers that I potted up last autumn for spring display. And you'll recall the video when I potted up the tulips, and you'll recall my videos about the wallflowers. And incidentally, wallflowers that I planted out in the garden are doing really well and full of flower and scent at the moment, doing so much better than the ones I put in the pots. But those spring pots, it's now time to lift them out of the greenhouse and to arrange them in an artistic way, let's just say, around the front door, because my house is north facing and it's good to have something to just brighten that up. So if you bear with me, I'll tell you what we'll do now. We'll go and sort out those tulips and, well, and look forward to the ones that aren't in bloom bursting into bloom in front of the house. So, ta-da! Don't they look super? I'm really quite happy with it. I know not everything is in bloom at the moment, but I'm going to look forward to things like the Rasta parrot coming into bloom and looking fantastic. And you know what? Like, everything isn't always perfect in the garden. My spring display is primarily for me. I don't get garden visitors at this time of year, so it's to cheer me up and just have something to look at that's a bit pretty at this time of year. I hope you have enjoyed this March garden tour, and if you have any questions about any of the things I was doing, then please do jot them down below. I'm always delighted to answer questions. And, well, I guess I will see you on the next video. Thanks as always for watching. Bye!